Hi, friends. I'm Rob Tigan.
And I'm Joanna, and this is the Growing Home Together podcast.
We're caring for the soul of your family, helping you grow closer to God
and each other.
Hi, friends. Thank you for joining us today at the Growing Home Together podcast. If you and I sat down to write a list of words describing the kids in our lives over the past year and a half, we might come up with words like stress, bored, lonely, depressed, anxious, disappointed, and unmotivated. Our kids have been through a lot, and it has taken a toll on their emotions and their relationships. We wonder how we can, as parents, take our kids and place them in a mature state to become confident and joyful people again.
That's right, and that is why we are so excited to welcome Marcus Warner and Chris Coursey back to the show to share their amazing strategy for raising joy-filled kids at every age and stage. Marcus and Chris are the authors of The 4 Habits of Raising Joy-Filled Kids that gives moms and dads some fresh hope and practical principles to invest in our families today. So thank you so much, Marcus and Chris, for coming back to join us today.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, thank you. So Joanna can tell you from my crowded bookshelves that I've built quite a big library of parenting and marriage books. It's a little crazy, but anyway, your book, The 4 Habits of Joy-Filled Kids, is a real standout. So what sets your book apart from all the other books on parenting?
That's a great question. We have start with the thesis that God created families for joy. That if you think about it, God created the world because he wanted a family, and he wanted a family that was going to be happy to be together. They were going to happy to be with him, happy to be with each other, that we're going to love each other. And yet so often what we find is that families seem to be more about survival than joy, to the extent that people feel like joy is the icing on the cake rather than the fuel on which the family runs. So we're trying to change the paradigm here. And that is that rather than looking at joy as something that randomly happens now and then, and we don't know why, looking at joy as actually the fuel that makes the family work, and that there are strategies that you can use to make sure that that fuel stays, flowing throughout our family life.
That's right. Marcus and I often say when we're speaking on our books is really, joy is not a luxury item on the menu. Joy is actually foundational to both who we are in Christ as well as, in our families and our communities. Like joy should be foundational in our relationships. And we define joy as just we're glad to be together. So we should be a people who are not only glad to be together, but we get back to joy when things go wrong during the hard stuff. That joy is just foundational for our well-being, for our walk with Christ, as well as just in our relationships and our families.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. For me, watching my kids struggle and really lose a lot of their joy over the past year and a half really hurt my heart as their mom. I mean, we had a couple kids who lost their jobs and they were going broke, and we had kids who were feeling pretty lonely and isolated, and we've had a couple of our kids who've had to deal with some pretty real mental health issues without easy solutions. And if I have ever been aware of my limits as a mom, it's been in this season. And with that has come, I think, a fair amount of fear, because I can't be everything that I want to be for my kids, and I can't protect them from pain. And I want to help my kids take up joy, but I don't always know how. And we were hoping that you could kind of help us understand some of those common fears that parents need to overcome.
Yeah, that's great observation, because we mentioned in another interview, if joy is missing, fear will always fill the gap. It's like if there's a vacuum and joy leaves, fear will backfill. And for parents, it's really easy to feel like their job is to protect their kids from pain and to make sure that they never go through anything hard. Or to think that as a parent, I don't want to feel pain and I don't want to go through anything hard. but it's not realistic, right? We're going to experience pain like you're describing, where you come to your limits. And when you come to your limits and you don't know how in the world you're going to get through that, that's hopeless despair. It's like, I don't have a solution for this. Is it possible to feel hopeless despair and still live with joy? Right? On the surface, it feels like, no, it's got to be one or the other. But we would say that actually both can be going on at the same time. That in those moments when I am struggling with fear, in those moments when I'm struggling with despair, in those moments when I'm most in need of things, what I really need is somebody who's happy to be with me, that I can share this moment with, who can help to restore my joy. And it allows me to know I'm going to be okay, even though all this is going on. So if you're going through all this with your kids and you've also got problems with Rob, then it just magnifies. But if you and Rob are happy to be together, if there's joy there, then what happens is it becomes easier to handle the things going on in your kid's life. In the same way, we can't protect our kids from all of the negative emotions in life. What we're really trying to do is lay a foundation for them to be able to handle those hard things and recover. Right. So, and that's the goal here. It's not to bubble wrap our kids so that they never experience anything bad. It's more like building their emotional immune system so that they can fight off the stuff that's in there so that it doesn't end up robbing their joy in living.
That's right. And I can remember when my wife, Jen, had our firstborn son in the hospital. I can remember the day looking at him and thinking, wow, I am responsible for this child. And, my job is to, be a good father for this boy. And I can remember the fear of failure. Like, wow, I want to give my children more than I had, but I could remember just the fear that I was just going to mess up. And this is why what Marcus is saying about joy is so important, that we are going to mess up. And the goal is when we do mess up, we get really good at rebuilding and repairing. But I think a lot of parents feel that pressure, that weight, that, wow, I have to do this. And we, out of the fear of failure, for example, we try to overparent, and maybe we work too hard, or we just, don't work hard enough. Maybe we underparent, and that fear can really rob us. And so we hope with this book that parents will actually find some hope and find some encouragement and really find a language that, parenting is hard. It is scary for lots of reasons. But as we actually focus on building joy, whether we're mad, glad, sad, hopeless, whatever the conditions are, we can learn to hold on to joy and return to relational, glad to be together joy. And that actually gives us strength. And just yesterday, I was interacting with my sons, and I had a great discussion with one of my sons, and he said, "Daddy, you're doing a good job." And it surprised me. It's kind of out of left field, but it was life-giving to hear that from my little boy. Because there's a lot of times as parents, we just feel like we just see that we're messing up. And what Marcus and I want to do is really validate parents that, yes, parenting is hard, but you're doing a good job. And learning to build joy, learning to have this language really does make a big difference in our families. And it's an important message for every parent to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that you started kind of giving that example of when your child's born, because that is a perfect example of how you kind of hold the weight of the responsibility and the joy at the same time, and yes. So I like that. One thing that really grabbed my interest in the book was how you connect joy to maturity in our kids. Can you explain a little bit about the connection between those terms?
Yeah, we actually would define maturity as the ability to endure hardship well.
Okay.
So the question then becomes, well, what do you mean by well? And largely the ability to endure hardship well means I can go through hard things and still live with joy. I can still find things to enjoy in life. I can still enjoy being with people. I can still go through this. If you don't, my capacity to endure hardship well is directly related to my capacity for joy. And so if if I find it easy to connect with people relationally, and I'm not talking about introvert extrovert here. Introvert extrovert, I think, is just a matter of how many people I connect with simultaneously. But introverts are very relationally motivated. They love being, but they tend to like to be with one or two people, not with a whole crowd. And in the same way, we're looking at that. We're all looking for ways to handle life. And one way to put it in concrete terms, trauma can be defined as feeling all alone in your big, overwhelming emotions. So if you've got to go through something hard and you feel all alone in it, your emotions escalate. And if you, in fact, you can go through suffering. And if you know somebody's happy to be with you as you're going through the suffering and you're all happy to be together, that suffering doesn't necessarily become traumatic. But if you go through suffering and there's no one to share it with you, and there's no one to bring you joy, there's no one to go through this and you're happy to be together, then that's when suffering becomes traumatizing. So they're very closely connected. You put the idea together that if you think about your maturity as a balloon, then joy is the air inside that balloon. Or if your maturity is a ball, the air inside the ball that allows it to bounce and bounce back is joy. And so they're directly related.
That's right. And I'll even add a third picture. And just yesterday, I transplanted some plants in our home that were outgrowing their pot. So I found a big bag of this organic soil and some larger pots. And I was just transplanting these plants. They outgrew their previous home, we might say. And so I put them in a bigger pot and put a lot of this nutrient-rich soil. And I watered the plant and I put it in a great spot on the counter with a window where the sunlight comes in. And so what Marcus is saying is really important here, that joy is that air in that ball, or it's even the nutrients in the soil that help good things to grow. And so in the book, we just start to really tease these things out with the different stages of maturity. What would it look like to have joy at these different stages? But the biggest, from a taking a step back, looking at all of this right here, we're really saying joy is foundational to reaching our full potential. So joy is a relationship where we are glad to be together. And this is in our families, we're glad to be together. We return to being glad to be together when there's disruptions and conflicts. And we even have a God who's glad to be with his children. So this is a topic that really is life-giving for families to start to both embrace and talk about and work toward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know everybody's heard the old saying that parenting doesn't come with an instruction manual, but you are totally proving that wrong, because you have created a mini manual for us that offers this simple model that is proving to be quite effective for the parents who use it. So can you just lay out for us what that model is?
Certainly. The model's ABCD. Try to make it easy to remember, right? And it basically, the ABCD represent 4 habits that go from the right brain over to the left brain in terms of their primary area of function. And so A is attune. And the idea of attunement is to read body language. And so I attune to you by reading your voice, because we can't see each other. So I've got to kind of read your voice and determine, interest that way. That's attuning. Parents have to learn to see their kids and recognize where they're at and meet them where they're at. Too often, this gets reversed in parenting, and that is, we expect our kids to attune to us. Like, we walk in the room and we expect them to notice what mood I'm in and adjust to that, instead of recognizing, no, as the adult, it's my job to attune to where they're at and start there. So that's A. B is build bounce, and that is, let's stay relationally engaged with them as they recover from hard emotions. And that is, too often we kind of send kids off and say, go to your room until you're over this emotion. And we give them non-relational ways to deal with their emotional problems. So building bounds is about remaining relationally engaged as they recover from their big emotions until they become more manageable. Then C is correct with care. And correcting with care basically means you don't start with the problem. You start with attuning and building bounds before you get into all the things you do to correct, and discipline kids. And then the D is develop disciplines relationally. So again, this is as simple as the difference between saying go out and weed the garden and taking them out and showing them how to weed the garden and turning it into a bonding experience. So you want to the more skills that kids develop, the more disciplines they develop, the more freedom that they have in life, the more opportunities there are in front of them. So we want our kids to have lots of skills, lots of disciplines, and we want to take advantage of those to build them relationally so that our bond with our kids gets as strong as possible. So that's the core model, the ABCD.
And what's good about this model is it's really teaching parents to keep the relationship first. I think every loving parent wants their children to be relational, joyful, resilient kids. And we now know from lots of good studies that resiliency is like the ingredient that makes a human really blossom in terms of how the brain works as God designed it to. And so with what we're after here with ABCD is really, training our children to be able to hold on to joy, to remember who they are, and to learn to recover when things go wrong. And it's helpful to just hold on to the fact that God made the human brain to learn by example and model. So children actually don't learn from our words. They learn most from our examples. And so what Marcus is talking about with attuning and building balance and correcting with care and developing disciplines relationally is we're demonstrating the behavior we want our children to have as they get older. So we're sharing their upsets so they feel connected. We're showing them how to recover when things go wrong. We're teaching them, we correct them so that the relationships stay bigger than the problem. And then we're teaching these disciplines relationally, and so that they're learning what we model. And largely that happens by our love, by our example, by our glad to be with them, and by walking through the hard stuff together. The human brain, the moment I feel alone, that creates the toughest conditions to navigate what I feel. And so this model is really keeping us connected with our children as they learn these important life skills. And these are skills they will use the rest of their lives.
Yeah, I love that. And the thing that's running through my mind is actually something that we've been experiencing in our parenting just this week. One area that our son is working on his maturity in is his organizational habits, right? He's at the age where he's kind of having new responsibilities put on him and he's having to learn how to rise to them. But along the way, he's making mistakes. So we had the evening where the homework didn't make it home and he knew he was going to have to go back to class the next day unprepared, and the tears just start coming down and he's just waiting for the hammer to drop at home and all that kind of thing. And we had to kind of do what you're talking about. And I'm so glad that there's a resource like yours to teach us this, just to deal with his fears and emotions and his embarrassment and his regrets and everything before we try to tackle, well, what are we going to do different tomorrow to make sure the homework comes home? Because until we got the relationship right and his joy restored and his confidence restored, we aren't going to be able to affect any kind of change in those habits, right?
Yeah, that's a perfect example. It really is. It's you can think about this as left brain versus right brain parenting. And that is, left brain parents lead with problems, right brain parents lead with relationships. And so we want to develop, most of us, if we have an undeveloped part of our brain, it's usually the right side. Okay. And so we want to develop these habits so that we spontaneously and automatically do things like that. So when we see our kid is distressed, we deal with the distress before we deal with discipline. So there's a time to put problems first, and it's called a crisis. So if your kid's about to step in front of a bus, you don't ask him how he feels about that first. You deal with the problem. But if we deal with everything in our kids' lives, always problem first, then what we're doing is we're training them to teach everything in life like a crisis. And so what we want to do is help them to understand how to regulate their own emotions and on the basis of a regulated emotion, realize they're going to make much better decisions about their problems once their emotions are under control. So helping them to learn to do that is huge. And how you do that in infancy and childhood and adult kids is quite different.
Yeah, that's right. And we really unpack that in the book. And I quickly can see the times that I miss this with what Marcus is talking about, were the times I lead with the problem first with my children. And a consistent response with my kids when I lead with the problem first is, Daddy, you don't see me, or Daddy, you don't hear me right now. Common response when I start with the problem first. Children do not feel seen, heard, or understood. But when we start with the relationship first and then navigate the problem, they feel seen, heard, and understood. And now they're going to be in a really good position to learn whatever lesson we want them to learn. But when we start with the problem first, we're making the problem bigger than the relationship. And that creates just about the worst conditions for our children to learn something redemptive or valuable in that moment. So this is really, it's very practical, but the results are really magnificent when we start to practice this.
Hey there, friends. We're interrupting this episode to make sure you know about a wonderful parenting resource that is available for you. Rob and Joanna Teigen of Growing Home Together are the parents of 5 kids ranging in age from elementary school to high school to adult newlyweds. Over the years, they have learned how important it is to place their sons and daughters in God's hands and how the power of prayer can make such a difference in their children's lives. Powerful Prayers for Your Son and Powerful Prayers for Your Daughter are beautiful books that offer page after page of targeted prayers that cover every kind of challenge and hope your kids will face as they grow. Both of these books by Rob and Joanna Teigen are available for you at growinghometogether.com or wherever books are sold. Okay, friends, let's get back to the show.
I think Joanna and I are going to have 5 more kids so we can practice these again. But
Yes.
But what I appreciate about, I think we have to remember, or at least I do, that feels very countercultural. So you do have to lean into relationship, because I think we're so taught to focus on the tasks and getting the tasks done and tasks at hand. And so I love how you've simplified this ABCD idea so that we can put the relationship first, and not, but it does take us stopping and being intentional about that and doing some of these practices, because I think everything around us is telling us to focus on getting the tasks done instead of putting the relationship first. And you had mentioned a little bit about kind of the different, how we approach that is different with each kid. And so we have 5 kids, ages 27 down to 10. And so I am learning that, yes, parenting our young adults is much different than parenting our grade schoolers. So can you maybe explain a little bit more about some of the key differences between parenting babies or kids or adults?
Yeah. So the, at the infant level, babies can't handle their emotions at all, right? So we don't expect them to. They can't tell us what they're feeling. So with babies, it's really easy to see. I have to attune to what my baby's body language is. Why are they fussing? Why are they whining? Are they happy? Do they need a break? What's going on? It's all about attuning to what's going on in their life, reacting to that. And then when they are upset, I have to comfort them. I've got to do all of it, right? They cannot comfort themselves at all. So in the infant stage, this is again where I am doing everything for the baby so that the baby begins to learn these skills by seeing them modeled. They're not learning any life lessons in infancy. Okay, so we don't say, well, we need to let them cry it out so that they don't become spoiled. That's not going to happen. You can't spoil a baby. So we go into the toddler years, and what's happening in the toddler years, which we include in those infant years, is that for the first time, their brain can go from feeling fear to feeling terror, from feeling anger to feeling rage, right? They can feel really big emotions. So that's why we call them the terrible two. So like right there around 18 months of age to about 3 years of age, they're experiencing extremely big emotions. So as parents, if we are problem first parents during the terrible twos, we're just going to be fighting constantly. So what we have to learn to do is to meet them, attune to the emotion that they're feeling, help them bounce back from that emotion, and then deal with, now, what's the right way to handle that emotion when it comes up? We correct third. Too often we lead with it. And then as you get into the child years, which are those are the years where I am now learning how to take care of myself. So in the infancy, somebody else is taking care of me. In the child years, I'm learning to take care of myself. So I go through potty training. I'm learning to feed myself. I'm learning to dress myself, right? But and as I go, I'm learning how to regulate my own emotions. So what I'm doing as a parent with my kids is I'm meeting them in their emotions, and now I'm helping them figure out what are the words that explain what I'm going through. How do I help them regulate themselves? So we call that co-regulation. We're working together with them to teach them how to begin regulating themselves. And the goal is by the time they become adults, they've been recovering, bouncing back from hard emotions over and over again for so long, it's pretty commonplace for them. And that makes that transition into the adult years at puberty much easier. If somebody hasn't learned these skills by the time they become adults, the reality is they're going to become addicted to something. It's just a question of what, right? They're going to be stuck as emotional infants and emotional children, and they're going to lack the maturity and the capacity to deal with an adult world. And that's going to create all kinds of problems. And that's really the maturity crisis that we have in our culture today. And that is, we have a bunch of adults who have never successfully navigated the infant and child level tasks when it comes to learning emotional regulation. So there's a mouthful, but that's kind of the gist of the difference between the three stages. Infants, we got to do it for them. Children, we're teaching them how to do it. Adults, we're kind of coaching them through the process of fixing their own problems.
That's right. Oh, good. I was just going to say, as parents, we quickly realize the areas where we need a little bit of growth, because I can remember when my infant was throwing a temper tantrum in that window that Marcus is talking about, with the brain's amplifiers turned on. And so anger goes to rage. And I can remember that helpless feeling of wanting it to stop. And, I could handle it for a while, but then I would reach that point where my brain goes, well, I don't quite know what to do here. And so it really helps to understand this, that as parents, we can also learn these important skills that we talk about in the book, and we can grow our joy so that we can better help our children be able to manage what they feel. Because at the end of the day, this is really about, can I manage what I feel? And so when our children are infants, we're helping them better manage what they feel, because we're doing the work with them that Marcus talked about. We are doing the regulating. They're looking to us, and they basically are saying, you show me what to do with what I feel. So I'm going to watch you and you show me. And for children, it's like, okay, let's do this together. And I can remember those times interacting with my children at the child stage. And, they're learning how to do this on their own, but they're looking to us as the parents to kind of coach and guide them as they learn. And basically their brain is saying, hey, all right, now how do I stay myself while I feel this big feeling? And that's what we're, as parents, we're helping them to walk out. And then when our children become adults, now they're really the ones that's walking it out. We're there if they need them, but they're going to walk out what they've learned. And it's really helpful to have this lens, because at the end of the day, my brain has to learn, how do I better manage what I feel? And as parents, where we find those places in our character that might need a little bit of help or some growth, we can connect with other parents. And hopefully that's one of the reasons Marcus and I wrote this book, so that parents have a language for what's happening and what's needed, so that they can also connect with other parents who possibly, Joanna and Rob, you have those skills where I don't. So I could spend time with you hearing your stories and how you handle the hard stuff. And that actually gives my brain some of the tools and resources to help me better navigate the journey at these different stages of life.
Yeah, that's encouraging, because it's your book offers hope in that way. I think, because I'm linking it, as we talked earlier, about maturity. And I know oftentimes we come in, and it's helpful to be able to say, rather than getting anxious when my kids are dealing with something that maybe I don't want to deal with or don't know how to deal with. And so all the warning signs go off and I react, to say maybe there's areas where I wasn't taught and I didn't learn maturity. And your book gives practical steps that not only I can pass on to my kids, but that maybe I can be honest and say, maybe I didn't learn this growing up, and I do need to mature in this area myself, and I can help my kid mature as well in the process. So it gives a lot of hope in that way.
It does.
I was just thinking back to earlier in our conversation when you mentioned trauma and the connection between trauma and having someone present with you. And I just have this memory flooding my head about when we were foster parents and we were taking care of this little baby. And I remember on the very first night that the baby was in our home, waking up hungry in the night in just such a completely hysterical and terrified state. And I was shocked at the level of emotion around just the simple problem of being hungry. And so we noticed that was night after night after night. And then after about 3 weeks of consistently dropping everything and running to the crib and picking up the baby and providing the meal and the holding and the soothing and all of that night, fear and terror just sort of melted away. And I was hoping that you could maybe even help me understand what was going on there a little bit better and just talk about what is the impact of our physical presence with our kids.
That's actually a wonderful illustration of exactly what we're talking about. So there's multiple things going on there. One of them is that it takes a brain about 3 weeks to 4 weeks to begin forming a new habit. So it took that much repetition for a brain that had been trained to feel terror when there wasn't food to begin to learn that to feel like I'm going to be taken care of. And so part of it is that we think, we do this once or twice and they'll figure it out. We don't understand that a part of that foster child's brain literally didn't grow. And so it's going to take more than a couple of days for that part of the brain to grow. It's going to take weeks. It's going to take months, right? There's going to be traditionally kids who are raised in orphanages don't get the relational bonding that they need. And so the relational circuitry in their brain is way underdeveloped. And so a lot of times we think, I'm just going to love on them and it's going to flourish. But instead of my love being like rain falling on good soil, it's like my rain's falling on a rock. And it's because there are parts of their brain that have literally not developed yet. And so you were doing numerous things there to try to help them grow their capacity to stay relational when they felt hunger. And that was going to take more than 1 or 2 times. That was going to take probably a good month. So that's partly what was going on there. Yeah.
Yeah. And, and Marcus is exactly right. And, the human brain has a bonding circuit. And the bonding circuit is really the foundation for the relational brain. And so the bonding circuit, it basically says, when I have a need now. So for infants, when they're hungry, when they want connection, they want a new diaper, whatever it is, they're cold, that bonding circuit turns on very brightly and loudly. And so as Marcus said, when I don't get a quick response, then what happens is my survival circuit kicks on. And my survival circuit says, if I don't get this food now, I'm going to die. So when the survival circuit kicks on, it brings a whole level of intensity to my needs. And so with the example that you shared, Joanna, is most likely there's the survival circuit that's overactive, that's working very hard, saying if I don't get what I need now, I'm going to die. And it took that time, as Marcus said, to really allow the brain. There's a joy center in our brain that actually overrides the survival circuit, which is glorious. And so as that new pattern forms, the joy center can override the survival circuit and say, hey, I'm going to be okay, because I've learned now when I have this need, there's a quick response and I'm going to survive and it's going to be okay. So as we're building joy with our infants, we're also building security And as that security develops, that is a security that will last a lifetime. And so, Joanna, in your case here, you were building security when baby's bonding circuit was screaming, hey, I need something here. I'm hungry. I'm going to die if I don't get what I need. By being consistent and predictable, that trains the brain in these new habits that says, okay, this need is important, but I always get what I need. There's a response. And over time, that builds security. And where there's security, there's joy and there's peace and there's a connectedness that happens with children and parents.
I love that. And, I think that has to inform parenting for us really at all ages and stages. I think for me as a mom, sometimes it's tempting to look at my child's big emotion and just think, oh, you're overreacting, or, oh, just settle down, or, oh, you're honestly embarrassing me in public, or whatever it might be. So how does what you're saying teach us how to respond to kids' emotions that we might not even understand?
Yeah, that's a great point. And that is that's why we say always start with the tuning. You can never go wrong by making sure that you're reading their body language first. So we have a simple tool that we use for helping kids build bounce once you've attuned and recognized what's going on and met them there. And it's VCR, and it is validate the emotion and then comfort them from the emotion so that they feel like they are back into a state that they can manage. So they've recovered. And so validation has two core elements to it. One is you're naming the emotion accurately that they're feeling. And two, you're accurately naming how big it is. So like if your teenage child is like going, oh, this is the worst thing ever, this is terrible. Instead of saying, well, that's stupid, it's not that bad. What validation says is, so what you're telling me is you're feeling, fear, and it's like at a level 8, like you're afraid that if this doesn't happen, this is going to be the end of your social life as you know it. And so the goal is to get them nodding their heads saying, yes, that is where I am at. You have correctly validated where I am. And so that's both naming the emotion accurately and how big it is for them. You don't have to agree that they should be feeling that emotion or that it should be that big, but you start by validating the fact that this is in fact where they're at. Then you go into comforting next. And so one of the biggest mistakes I find that parents make when it comes to the attuning and building bounce is they skip validation and they go straight to trying to manage the problem. And so comforting is really about how do I make this problem smaller? And so one way I do it is to tell them, well, it's not going to, you're not going to lose all your friends. This isn't going to happen. What's not going to happen makes the problem smaller. Then you offer them a new perspective. What if we look at it from this angle? And then you help them develop a new plan. And by the time you've done that, their problem now feels more manageable and they can breathe and they're like, okay, I think I can handle this. I feel like myself again. I'm going to be okay. We call that recovery. Okay, so we validate and we comfort to help them recover so they feel like themselves again and they feel like they can manage what's going on. So we do that over and over and over again, thousands of times with our kids throughout growing up. And by the time they get to be adults, validation, comforting, and recovering should be habitual for them.
That's right. And one of the common responses Marcus and I hear when we're teaching this is sometimes as parents, we're afraid to validate because we're afraid it's going to make the problem worse. So instead of putting out the fire, we're afraid to validate it because it might be putting gasoline on a fire and making the reaction bigger. And what Marcus and I, share is, no, when you validate, you're actually helping children to feel seen, heard, and understood. And now that I'm feeling seen and heard and understood by you, now my emotions aren't so big because I feel like you're with me in this. So validating is just saying what we see. Wow, you are really mad here. I see that. That creates the context for the comfort and for the recovery. And so even if it kind of feels like, I'm afraid to validate this because I don't want to make it worse or make it bigger, or they'll just do this more often, or as Marcus mentioned earlier, I'm afraid it'll spoil them. Oh no, when we validate, that's simply saying, hey, I see you and I hear that this is upset. But I'm with you and we're in this together and we're going to get through it. And that instills the ability for me to say, oh, whenever I'm upset, comfort's always around the corner. Instead of disconnection, instead of abandonment, instead of rejection, the brain learns, big upsets just lead to good connections.
Yeah, I love that. That's really helpful. And, hey, from talking to other moms, something that seems kind of universal is that we're pretty tough on ourselves, We wish we were more fun. I wish I was fun like Rob, who writes the joke books and everything. He corners the market on fun at our house. And, I wish we were more organized or more health conscious or better spiritual teachers for our kids or whatever. But I was just hoping that you could leave parents today with a word of advice when they do feel like they're kind of falling down on the job, but they really want to take hold of joy for themselves that you're talking about in their parenting.
Yeah, that is a common thing, isn't it? We get down on ourselves pretty quickly because most of us, when it comes to maturity, there's always a gap, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a gap between where we know we could be and where we see ourselves functioning. And if my joy is dependent upon my performance, I'm in trouble. So joy has to be based on my relationships. And that is, do I still love my kids? Yes. Do my kids still love me? Yes. Then I can find some joy, even if we're all messing up a whole bunch of stuff. Do I still love my husband or my wife, even though, we're messing things up and not getting them all right? Yeah. That means I can still find joy. Is the God that I serve happy to see me even when I mess up? Right. So by having an understanding that my joy is related to my relationships and not to my performance is a big, first step there. And knowing that we all do fall short, that's part of the human existence, is that there's always going to be a gap between how well I could have done something and how well I did it for the most part. And, but that's not my identity. That's not who I am. It doesn't define me. And so, part of the joy of life is learning how to be okay with each other when we're not perfect. And, so I would encourage people that that's not even the goal. The goal here is, it's like with my kids, I figure I can make a whole lot of mistakes with my kids. The one thing I don't want to do is lose my relational voice, right? I don't want to lose their trust in me. And so I find that the fastest way to lose trust with my kids is for them to not feel seen, heard, and understood. And so that's why we emphasize validating so much, because I think it's one of the key things that helps us, and being quick to apologize and own it when I'm not being what I ought to be, and might not be next week either. So we're just gonna but still be happy to be together, and we're in this together, and let's just keep moving forward.
And that's right. That's so wise. And I hope that every parent can hear that. And, I often tell parents, just because you would even feel like you're failing or you're a failure, only a loving, caring parent would say something like that, because you really want to do a good job with your children. Only a loving person would feel that way. And so I think we all can relate to what Marcus was saying, and holding on to these words that, at the end of the day, if your children feels loved, you've done it well. And we want to use the opportunities to correct, to repair when we've messed up, and just to remind our children that we do love them. It's been fun because when I've messed up with my kids, I realize it, and sometimes they help me to realize it. I'll come back to them and I'll say, yeah, daddy really messed up there. And I might hear from one of my sons, that's okay, daddy, we still love you. So, at the end of the day, we want our children to feel love. Love never fails, as the Bible tells us. And so using our words and our actions to just convey, hey, even when we mess up, I still love you, it will go a long way.
Yeah. That's so encouraging. And I'm sitting here listening to this and looking at kind of the roadmap that you guys developed with this book. And I'm just amazed at God, because it just really, as you put the pieces together, God did wire our brains for relationship, for relationship with Him, for relationship with each other. And so, my big takeaway with all the great stuff that you guys have been saying is to always put the relationship first. And a lot of these things that we practical steps we can take are to learn to build, focus on the relationship and put that first. And we're not going to do that perfectly, but so as I sit here in amazement on how God has made us and wired us, I would love if one of you would be willing to pray for the parents listening who maybe want to start taking those steps towards joy with their kids right now.
Yeah, gladly. So Heavenly Father, in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, Lord, I thank you that, Lord, you've created and called each and every parent out there. And Lord Jesus, I just pray that all of our parents would just hear the message that they are loved in your sight, Lord, and that they would see themselves and their families and their children through your eyes. And Lord, I do pray for the hope and the encouragement, the joy, the peace, all of these good things, Lord, to just be present in these parents, in these families, Lord, that everyone would just enjoy your peace. And thank you, Lord, that you're always available to guide us, to speak to us. Thank you for your word. And I just pray, Lord, each and every parent would just have a sense of you being with them, delighting in them, and just saying, well done, my good and faithful servants. And that reality would spill over into their interactions with their children. Thank you, Jesus, for your tenderness to our weaknesses and your love and your truth. We bless you today and just pray your peace over all the parents who are listening today. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Well, Marcus and Chris, I just know that everybody's going to want to learn more about you and take hold of your resources. So where can we go to connect with each of you online?
Yeah, I'm at deeperwalkinternational.org and Chris is at THRIVEtoday.org. And those are probably the best places. You can find our book at Amazon. And but yeah, THRIVEtoday.org and deeperwalkinternational.org.
Okay, awesome.
That's right.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And thank you, Marcus and Chris, for giving us such great encouraging words today. We really appreciate your time with us.
Thank you, friends. Good to be with you.
Yeah, it's been fun hanging out with you guys today.
Yeah, you too. And thank you, friends, for joining us today for the Growing Home Together podcast. We would love to connect with you over on our website at growinghometogether.com. We have a free download of fun activities to connect with your kids and all kinds of resources so you can laugh together and create memories and also pray for your kids and whatever they're going through. At Growing Home Together, we're caring for the soul of your family
And growing home together with you.
Bye.
Bye.